Hello, and thank you for your interest in my poster titled Differences in Implicit versus Explicit Grammar Processing as Revealed by Hierarchical Weibull Modeling of Reaction Times. My name is David Abugaber, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Cognition of Second Language Acquisition Lab at the University of Illinois at Chicago. So, to dive right into it, prior artificial language learning studies using reaction time-based measures have found that participants can learn grammar in an artificial language even when they don't have conscious awareness of the grammar rules that are involved. However, one limitation of these studies is that they've performed linear analyses that typically only compare central tendencies in the data, like the mean or the medians of distributions, and they don't allow us to examine qualitative differences across participant groups. By contrast, using methods like hierarchical Weibull modeling can help us to pull apart parameters that map onto constructs from cognitive psychology, so that we can get a more qualitative look at differences between rule-aware and rule-unaware processing. So today I'm reporting the results of a conceptual replication of Badderink and colleagues' 2014 implicit learning experiment, and we're analyzing it via hierarchical Weibull modeling with the research question, do participants with versus without rule awareness differ in the underlying processes involved in grammar processing? In our experiment design, we used a mini artificial language that was quite simple. It just involved 4 pseudo words, gi, ro, ul, and ne, and there was an underlying rule such that 2 of these words tended to occur with living nouns in English, like gi, horse, or ul, student, and the other 2 tended to occur with non-living nouns, like ne, pencil, and ro, computer. We set up a reaction time task that measures for learning of this regularity. In the task, participants have to say whether a noun is living or non-living, and then whether it was near or far based on the overt meanings of these artificial language articles. The trick here, though, is that if there's a rule-violating trial and participants have learned the rule, then they will be slower for the living, non-living response on these. At the end of the experiment, we perform a debriefing questionnaire to determine whether the participant became consciously aware of the grammar rule involved. Now let me tell you a little bit more about the analysis method that we used. Hierarchical Weibull modeling comes from a family of analysis methods that look at the shape of an entire distribution rather than just measurements of central tendency like the mean or the median. Hierarchical Weibull modeling has certain advantages in that it can fit the data relatively well, it's robust to misspecification in the model, and by using Bayesian inference, it can adjust output parameter estimates by pooling data across participants. When we run this analysis, we get 3 parameters that describe the shape of a distribution, and these map onto certain constructs from cognitive psychology. So we have shift, scale, and shape. Shift is said to correspond to the speed of peripheral processes, for instance, sensory or motor processes that occur automatically and are relatively unrelated to cognition. By contrast, scale has to do with central processing speed, and shape is to do with the processing architecture. So, for instance, the stages or strategies used in carrying out cognitive tasks. In our analysis, we first replicated a rule learning effect both in rule-aware and rule-unaware participants, replicating what was found by Badderink and colleagues in 2014. And we found that rule-violating trials had slower responses than rule-adhering trials. In the hierarchical Weibull analysis, we fit separate models for our 12 rule-aware participants and for our 12 rule-unaware participants. And then we fit, for each of these, we fit separate models for rule-adhering versus rule-violating trials. And then that way we could see how the 3 Weibull parameters could vary according to the trial type. We found that for rule-aware participants, seeing a rule violation led to a change in processing speed, that is the scale parameter, and also in the processing architecture, as indexed by the shape parameter. By contrast, for rule-unaware participants, seeing a violation only led to a change in processing speed, that is to say, the scale parameter. So, in terms of discussion here, we find that even though there's no difference between rule-aware and rule-unaware participants in terms of reaction times overall, that is to say in the median reaction times across the experiment, we did find using hierarchical Weibull modeling that there was a change in the underlying cognition. So for both kinds of participants, rule violation lead to changes in processing speed, but only for rule-aware participants is there a change in the involved cognitive architecture. And one possible takeaway for language teaching here might be that even though you don't need metalinguistic awareness to acquire L2 grammar, such awareness does indeed change how the grammar is processed, at least in the early stages of learning. Now, our study isn't without its limitations. It's only a computer-based study that might not map onto learning in real classroom environments, and our participant group wasn't homogeneous, and of course, prior researchers have raised concerns about the validity of using self-report methods to assess rule awareness. But in all, this study shows how a powerful analysis technique like hierarchical Weibull modeling can be used to pull apart constructs in ways that can't be seen by typical linear measures. Thank you.